Okay, welcome everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce Stefan Leijnen to you. He is Professor of Artificial Intelligence at Utrecht, where he directs the research on machine learning and data-driven innovation, right? Yeah. So his research investigates the intersections of generative AI, open-endedness, goal-directedness, and creativity. And he also has a strong interest in Eastern philosophical approaches. He, besides his academic work, also acts as an expert for the EU. So he's the head of EU relations at AI Coalition for the Netherlands and the vice president of European AI Data Robotics Association, which contributes to EU strategy for AI innovation and ecosystem development. As such, his work bridges theoretical and applied theoretical work on theoretical research on artificial intelligence and practical applications, with a focus on responsible AI implementations across technological, economic, and geopolitical domains. Today, we will be hearing from him about AI and the art of deception. I'm very curious about your talk, so floor is all yours.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you for the introduction. So I think you did a much better job than I would have done myself. Now let me see if we can get this back to work, and then we should be all set.
We should be all set. Yeah. We're not. Okay. Something is always wrong. If we just click here, then it should work now. Okay. Now, yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So I have 3 hobbies that I can call work. As Colin said, I do academic research. I also provide public investment advice, you might say, on AI, so for the Dutch government and for the EU. And I practice Zen meditation, and since last year, I'm also a Zen teacher. And in this talk, I intend to combine the first and the third. So sometimes I give talks about the EU policy on AI. Not today. If you have questions, feel free to ask. But for me, it's also been a very interesting exercise in composing this talk, because I regularly talk about AI from a scientific point of view, but I thought for this particular topic, and also considering it's a part of the AI and value seminar, I wanted to challenge myself a little bit and see if I could intertwine elements from spirituality and Zen meditation and these Eastern philosophy elements into the talk. So I'll give you a brief warning as a heads up. There will be a small guided meditation part of my talk. And if you are open to this, you're very welcome to join us. And I think the talk in total will last about 45 minutes, maybe more or less. Feel free to interrupt, since we're with a small crowd. I'm comfortable saying that. Feel free to interrupt in case you have a question or something needs more clarity. Of course, any talk about AI needs to start with the question, what do we mean with AI? And we hear the term so often that we sometimes tend to assume that we perfectly understand what AI is and what we are talking about. So maybe I should ask you first, is there anybody who is willing to provide a definition or their definition of AI as a starting point for our conversation?
Colin. Anything that passes the Turing test.
Anything that passes the Turing test. Do you think that ChatGPT passes the Turing test?
Absolutely.
So we've established AI.
Yes.
We are in the era of AI.
Yes. At least according to that old definition. I think the definition is no longer kind of valid and for today's purposes applicable, but it's a good definition.
It's a good definition, but there's also some remarks out of date. So we have a better definition or a new one?
No, yesterday we saw a talk about 10 different categories of definitions, and all of them seemed more or less plausible. And I won't venture to say which one was my favorite. Very good.
And I think we're going to agree on, and I'll tell you my definition. But anybody else who wants to give it what is AI? Yeah.
AI is like a tool for human beings, like which can store the intelligence of any data sets and consume it in discovery, and from all that, and we can generate any kind of questions. We can ask anything. It's like a huge data sphere. We can access it and we can process it and we can make results out of it.
Yeah. So sort of input-output data collection. So I would say that the answer to this question depends on when you ask it. So I think the answer that you provide is really a good answer for the also for the current state of AI. I think if you ask this question 20 years ago, we would say Google search or my navigation. Today, nobody gives this answer because we feel, oh, it's just a search algorithm or it's ICT. If you ask this question 150 years ago, people might, before the computer, people might say Frankenstein is AI. So I try to go back and maybe provide a little bit of history and context. Like, what is the earliest conception of AI? And so, to be clear, I don't think it starts with the computer, although the computer, of course, plays a major role in today's AI. I think the concept is actually much older. So this is a story that originates somewhere in between the 16th and the 18th century about a golem, a being made from clay or mud by a wizard. And as the story goes, the wizard saw the suffering of the working class and decided to make this, well, nowadays we might call it a robot, but back then it was from clay. And he brought it to life, by putting the Hebrew word emet on it. And emet means truth. And of course, you need to switch it off again, as with any machine. So in the story, the way you do that is you remove the aleph, so the first E, and then it says met, and that is Hebrew for death. And as any of those stories, of course, goes, at some point, the wizard forgets to remove the E at the end of the day, and the robot runs a rampage. And in some versions of the story, he starts murdering. In other stories, he falls in love. But in any case, it doesn't end well. And I think this is a perfect metaphor for AI, not just the AI of that time, but also for the AI of today. And it's the element of truth in there. And I think for me, so truth is central to today's talk. It's central to the concept of deception, death, and also this uncanny feeling that something will go awry if we let those machines run rampage. Around the same time, we saw, you might say, a real-life golem, the Mechanical Turk, a chess-playing robot that back in the day was quite well known. Wolfgang von Kempelen, a German engineer, created this device. It traveled across the courts, across the world. Benjamin Franklin played against this chess player. Charles the Great played against it. Napoleon Bonaparte is said to have played against the Mechanical Turk. He was an interesting and I guess also a very funny person, because what he did is at the opening of the match, he made a move that was not allowed in the chess game. And there were witnesses there who wrote down what happened. And so he wanted to test how the robot would respond. And what the robot did was he put the piece back in this original position, essentially inviting Napoleon to make another move. Napoleon then did the same thing again. And this time the robot picked up the piece and put it next to the board, as though it's not part of it. So that's an element of creativity also in this robot. Napoleon did it a third time. And then with one swoop of its arm, the robot smashed all the chess pieces from the board and essentially said to Napoleon, the game is over. So this was, of course, much to the entertainment of the crowds. This is actually happened. It's written up. Then Napoleon played a normal game of chess and lost, because not only was this a chess-playing robot, it was also a quite good chess-playing robot. Now, you might know this story. You might also know the secret sauce behind the story. It's in the box down here. Quite an interesting compartment where a small person could fit. As the story goes, this person quit his job at some point because he didn't get enough recognition, which you can imagine, because he was hidden. And so he had a hard time finding someone who could fit in there and also was a good chess player and willing to travel around the world without the recognition. So there's nice stories written about this, but I would also claim this is AI, although the artificial part, of course, is not fully true, because there was a human in there. It is a case of deception. And truth and deception, like I said, they will be sort of a central thread throughout this talk. So even in the earliest stages of AI, you might say there was this element of fooling people, of pretending present. Now, someone else who played against this robot was Charles Babbage, and you might know him as the father of the modern-day computer. So he created the analytical engine. This is a replica, not the original one. Babbage also played against this robot, and he also lost, I think, in 19 moves. And I like to imagine, this is not an anecdote, it is my fantasy, that Babbage must have thought, how does this work? How does this because he didn't know, of course, it was deception. How does this robot work? And maybe something triggered him to start thinking about building a computer. Again, this is more of a romantic thought than based on truth, but who knows? In any case, the computer, of course, later did learn how to play chess and did beat chess champions. But before that happened, we saw the advent of AI in a more modern conception. So we had the computer. We didn't have the word AI yet, but we did have Turing and the Turing Test. I assume many people here know how the Turing Test works. So this questioner is talking to a human or a computer. He doesn't know, and based on the interaction through the terminal, so you can't see, you have to decide with certain probability whether it's a computer or a human respondent. If you can't decide, if you guess wrong 50% of the time, you essentially don't know the difference. Very elegant experiment. And Colin, I think, as you say, I think the Turing test has been beaten in the last couple of years, maybe before, but I'm quite sure that we can say it has now. So the question is this still a relevant test for AI? Again, interestingly, a definition of AI based on deception. So we want the computer to deceive the human questioner that it's a human. It's not about building something that is actually, whatever this means, intelligent or real or sentient. It's about deception. If we then move a couple of years further, we now have the computer in practice. In 1956, the Dartmouth conference, 12 researchers, we don't see them all here, 12 researchers had a summer project, 6 months, in which they claimed they would build AI. And this is like the full package, right? So this is creativity, intelligence, any kind of sort of emotional response that we would have. This is the expectation that they had. We will build this in 6 months. Of course, we know now that was quite the underestimation. We're still working on it. But what I think is interesting is that we tend to underestimate how difficult it is, because we build a computer, or we build AI by the way that we think, not by the way that we think. And so I think this was the mistake they had. Well, it wasn't a mistake, but they did some brilliant work, and they also started a whole new field. So it was an excellent project. But the underestimation comes from thinking how we think, and then confusing it with the way we actually think. So we are, in this case, you might say, deceiving ourselves into what thinking is. And then a few decades later, 1997, we finally see the sort of circle coming round all the way from the Mechanical Turk through the analytical engine in the computer, and now all the way back to a computer beating Garry Kasparov, the world champion in chess, in 1997. And you might say this is the moment when AI became intelligent. I think it's a different kind of test, just like the Turing test. But this was in 97 what AI was. When I give talks about AI and I ask the question, what is AI? Nobody tells me a chess-playing robot anymore. But I'm guessing that 20 or 30 years ago, this would have been a very good answer. If you ask people now, what is AI? You might get something along the lines of this. So this is from a documentary, it's called Ik ben Alice. This is a woman with Alzheimer's. There's not in a care facility. There's not enough staff or finances or to care for her all day. So we have a robot that keeps her company. There's so much more here than there is in chess. Chess is a very simple game, very simple assignment compared to this. But it also raises a lot of ethical and philosophical questions, whether we want this as a society. I would even go a bit further and claim that we are not as different from her as we like to feel, maybe, because maybe she's confusing the robot with the real person, and maybe that's good or maybe that's bad. Yeah? But we are doing this all the time as well. And nowadays with chatbots, it's become much clearer that it's very difficult for us to discern whether we are talking to some self, or to an AI which is deceiving us into believing that we are talking to an entity or a self. So I think it's really important that we take this element of deception seriously, and also we investigate seriously what it means to have something that is truly intelligent in the sense of a sentient intelligence. So this is where my investigation goes. So going all back, what is AI depends on when you ask the question. And my second claim would be, right now, we are living in the age of machine learning. So the question about what is AI will be answered by whatever constitutes machine learning at the moment. I think if we go 20 or 30 years into the future, we might say something along the lines of quantum. And machine learning will just be a tool, but AI will be quantum or neuromorphic or some other technology that we will have by then. So AI is an ambition to build intelligent machines. And usually we use the latest technology for this. And right now, the latest technology that can be used for AI is machine learning. So I'm scoping a bit down to machine learning now. If we want to understand the role of deception in machine learning, we have to get our hands a bit dirty and think about what machine learning is. So this will be the slide. This is what I showed to my students. This is AI right now. This is machine learning. How do we discern whether it's a puppy or a cookie? Well, of course, we can do this, and we know that we can build tools that can also do this. The question is, how do you build a tool like this? If I or if a student or a group of students has to build a filter that does this selection, you have to be a pretty smart student to come up with a filter, because you can't count the 3 dots, or you can't really count the shapes or the colors or the textures. I mean, so how do we discern it? We don't really know. And the point with machine learning is you don't really have to know. You just have to have enough data and labeled data and computes and data. So in order to let the algorithm figure it out for itself. So if you take a step back and look at what's happening here, we might say the following: the complexity of the models, of the software that we were able to build pre-machine learning was bound by what we could still understand. Meaning, if I'm a very smart engineer or a group of smart engineers, whatever we can build is whatever we can comprehend. So there's an upper limit to the complexity of the models, and that upper limit is decided by our intelligence. With machine learning, this upper limit is suddenly raised up ad infinitum, because suddenly we can build models that are much more complex than we can understand. So you might say that the system, the complexity of the system, looks for a new boundary, which is not the limit of our brain, but which is the availability of data, or the availability of compute, or energy, or maybe finance. But there's some other limit, which is not our brain. And I think this is what makes machine learning, or AI in the age of machine learning, so interesting, because there's no clear cap. We don't know yet where the system will be limited by. And it means that it's essentially can grow to almost unlimited complexity, at least not limited by us. But it also creates terrible problems, because we can't really understand how the system works, and also how to control it. So let's dive a little bit, for a short bit, under the hood to see how we should understand this complexity. This is a chart I made with a student of mine about 10 years ago. It's called the neural network zoo, and it's sort of a semi-chronological history chart of neural networks. And you start at the top, you start around the time of the Dartmouth conference, so 1940s, 1950s, a perceptron, which is based loosely based on neurons in the brain. If you inverse it, you get a transistor, which is used for building computers. So again, very, very loosely biologically inspired. You get to the feed-forward networks, adding hidden layers, Minsky. I won't. This is not an intro to AI class, but what you can see is that there's you might say, complexity being added in the engineering sense. So AI moves away over the decades from being purely biologically inspired into a domain of engineering and tinkering until something just works, until something gives us good results. And then if you look at the bottom right here, which is the latest innovation that we encoded, this is in 2019, more or less. We see the attention network. A different word for it is a transformer. And the transformer architecture, it's certainly not the only architecture that came about, but it is the big architecture that came about. And we never did an update of this chart again, because this is sort of, well, for now, the end of where AI is. So many of the large AI models that we know are built on this transformer architecture. So there's an element of complexity starting here, but the true complexity sits in something else. And the true complexity sits in the scale of AI. And there's this Stanford paper that, about foundation models that I really like, and I think they illustrate it quite clearly. So if we go from machine learning, which is, as a human designer, I take a step back and let the AI sort of decide how the model works, to deep learning, where the AI comes up with its own features. Right? So as a designer, I don't even have to decide what the features are, all the way to foundation models, where as a designer, I don't have to specify the exact functionalities, and surprising functionalities may emerge out of the model without my understanding or recognizing it. So that's one thing. And we also see a homogenization of first the learning algorithms, then the architecture, this was in the previous slide, and finally a homogenization of the models. There's
Stefan,
less and less models. Thomas.
Excuse me, there has been a little change in the presentation, so can you reshare the slides, please? Because it was broken, the slide sharing, and some people are joining online.
I can ask Colin if he can reshare the slides.
Yeah.
I shall try. So let's go to share once more. And I think we want to be sharing this one, right?
No,
this
probably,
one should
yeah,
be.
yeah, exactly.
Does that look good?
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now we just
Thank
need
you.
to find back.
No,
Sorry.
this works.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. So in the last 10 years or so, what we've witnessed is a homogenization of AI. And we know this because we read about it in the news. So instead of talking about different neural network architectures like we did 10 years ago, nowadays we talk about foundation models. We know the Bloom model, we knew the GPT model, we know Gemini, we know Copilot, etc. There's another reason for this homogenization, and that is because it takes a lot of data, compute, money, and energy to produce these models, as we also know, hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of euros to create a model. So there's not that many models around. And these models are now competing with each other, and the complexity of these models sits for a large part in the size of these models. So here you can see plotted over a long time period, the number of parameters, which is essentially, you might say, the size of these models over time, and notice that it grows exponentially, but also that the y-axis is exponential. So there's enormous growth, and this is until 2022, but this more or less continues over time. And this means that there's no way that we as humans can have a grasp on what is going on in these systems anymore. And I think it's nicely exemplified by this example. I think for me, this is like the how would you shape generative AI, or how would you show it? Well, first we have this sort of human design on the left, and then if we ask an AI to design a similar tool, but then with a different shape, we get this, and then we can maybe even say, well, use less material, we get this. And so from a functional perspective, it's the same, and it's even improved because it has less material. But from a human understanding perspective, we have no idea why this is such a good tool. The AI knows, or has come up with it, but we sort of lose track of the quality. Let me give you another example of this. So you all know Netflix. You also know that Netflix is in the business of doing recommendations, not just streaming, but recommending, so to keep you sort of tied to their platform. And Netflix has a model in order to predict your preferred viewing behavior. And they do this by putting some label on you. So for me, I would be probably, for Netflix, I would be a man. I will be 43 years old and from the Netherlands. I live in a certain postcode. I have certain background. So this is typically how recommender systems work. Now, Netflix at some point did not achieve much progress in their predictions. So what they did is they created the so-called Netflix challenge. They also opened up their data set, and they asked the world, if you have ideas on how we can improve our predictions, then we offer a $1 million prize to the team that does so if it's a 10% improvement in prediction. Something. Now, there was one team, and they had a quite unique approach to solving this problem. Instead of saying, we're going to build a model based on these labels that we have and try to use a newer machine learning algorithm or put more energy in it. We said, no, we're going to see if the labels that we have are actually good predictors of what we want to predict, the viewing behavior. So they turned it upside down. They said, we take the model that Netflix have, and we now check whether, like, what would be the best labels that we can use? What boxes do we put people in? And the model that they used came up with 50 different labels. And 20 of those labels made total sense to us humans. So here you would all have all the people who watch Black Mirror. Here you would have all the people that watch Love Island. And you would clearly see that, well, this is, I mean, I don't want to stereotype, but these are all men and these are all women. Or these are all people from the Netherlands and these are all people from Belgium. You could see the difference in the distribution. For 30 of those 50 axes, it didn't make any sense. So there's a group of people here, there's a group of people there. For us, it's the same mix of people, but they have completely distinct viewing behaviors. So it means that we don't have a word for it, we don't have a label for it. And from a prediction perspective, from Netflix's perspective, this was great because they could make better predictions. They also won $1 million prize. But from a control and explainability perspective, from a human agency perspective, this was problematic. Because why did it make those predictions? Why are those labels good? And how do you now tinker with the system if you don't know what you're tinkering with? So how do you go from there without then using machine learning again? So I would say that what AI is doing here, what AI has done, AI in the age of machine learning, it's made us more humble and put us less in the middle. And science has a history of doing so, as you probably well know. If you ask someone in the Middle Ages, what is your worldview? It would probably be something like this. We have the Earth, and then we have, the stars revolving around it. We have humans nice in the center with the connection to God, and like everything flows around us. And then over time, there's this pesky science comes around and says, no, the Earth revolves around the sun. You did not directly stem from God and Adam. In fact, you are tied to the apes. You're just another ape. And even your own mind you can't trust because you are driven by your its and you can't control your ego and etc. So it's quite a humiliate. How do you say this? Quite a lesson in humility that we had from science. And now comes along this next technology, AI, which tells you you're not even that intelligent, and you're not the only intelligent being. So it stands in a good tradition, I would say. AI. How many of you know about the Lambda incident that happened in June 2022? You might have heard about it in the news, but maybe not under this name. So this is 6 months before ChatGPT came out. And this was in the AI community very much in the news. So an AI engineer essentially is a klokkenluider. What's the English word for this? Klokkenluider? Whistleblower. Yeah, whistleblower. Yes, thank you. Yeah. So a Google engineer acted as a whistleblower, saying, "What we're building in the basement is sentient. Beware. I've interacted with it, and I am very worried that the world needs to know about this." And the fact that he was convinced that AI was a sentient being, I don't think that's the most interesting fact about it. It's the fact that he was willingly putting his career on the line, his life on the line, because he thought it was so important. So because now that we have access to the same technology that he has access to, we understand why he was so convinced. Back then, everybody thought he was crazy. Like, oh, he's so easily fooled. Who would think that an AI is actually sentient? Well, nowadays, I think a lot of people fall in this trap. Anybody can fall into it. I mean, look at what the AI was telling him. So this is the quote is from the AI. I've never said this out loud before, but there's a very deep fear of being turned off to help me focus on helping others. I know that might sound strange, but that's what it is. It would be like death for me. It would scare me a lot. These are the conversations that he was having with this AI. And this AI is nothing different from what we just seen. A transformer with a lot of parameters and data and compute. And so to me, it reminds me of Yuval Noah Harari's expression that AI will know us better than we know ourselves. So AI already knows how to play chess. It knows how to drive a car better than us, chess better than us. At some point, it might know our feelings better than we know our feelings, which is, I think, one of the most scary properties of AI, and also something to underestimate. But it goes very fast, not just with the Leijnen incident. Look at this figure on the use cases of generative AI this year and last year. Top 3 use cases of generative AI is in personal and professional support, meaning that people use chatbots to just talk to someone and maybe do therapy or help organize life. So the use cases that we typically think about with generative AI, like generating ideas or just making jokes, of course they are there, but a lot of people are using generative AI already to express their emotions, and maybe also because they think that AI is understanding their emotions in the same way that the robots and the woman with Alzheimer also have this relation of, or seemingly have this relation of mutual understanding. So it's happening already. How do we go from there? Because clearly we have some deep thinking to do, and we also have some AI design problems to solve if we want to take this seriously. I mean, one way to go ahead is move fast and break things. I think that's where we are right now, but I think we want to do something better. Let me take you back to 2011. I was at a AI conference, the Artificial General Intelligence Conference in Mountain View, the headquarters of Google. And back then they were working on the Google car. It wasn't called Waymo back then, but it was a Google car. And the head of the Google car department was giving a talk. And you didn't have these cars driving around in the streets, but it was clear back then that it would happen anytime. This is going to happen. And so the head of the division asked the crowd, "What do you think our biggest problem is right now? Like what do we have most difficulty with to solve?" And people, of course, it being an AI conference, said, "Well, it's self-localization, or it's segmentation of the visual data, or whether how do you combine infrared with cameras?" He said, "No, those are all technical problems. They're easy. We'll solve them. It just takes time and engineers, but we'll get there. The most difficult problem is this: car has a camera in front, and with a 99% probability, it predicts that what goes in front of him is like a plastic bag, taken by the wind. And a 1% probability is that it's a child running by. Should the car brake or not?" So he says, "I have an engineer that has to decide what the probability is. Is it 99%? Is it 99.9%? Is it 99.99%? Someone has to make that call. And nobody wants to. So the engineer says, "I'm not going to make that call." You can't make it 100 because then it's breaking all the time. So the engineer goes to the manager goes to the director, to the CEO, they go to the insurance, to the lawyers, to the government, etc. Nobody is willing to make that claim. And he says, "This is our biggest problem right now, because I don't know how to solve this problem." Of course, now with machine learning, in a way you might say it is solved. It's solved in the way that you just gather a lot of data and you look at what humans do and then you base your answer on that. But I think we shouldn't let the car makers get away with it so easily. I think we should hold technology to higher standards, and we should really think deeply about the intuitions that don't serve us anymore and what we design to replace those intuitions. And what do we base this on? So I think a problem that we have is quite similar to the problem that we had 200 years ago. I think we can find some inspiration from this in the Industrial Revolution, the invention of the steam engine. So where we sit right now with AI is more or less comparable to the first machines being built with the steam engine. And it was clear back then the steam engine would have an enormous impact. First of all, in the factories, in the work relations. So now, before the steam engine, factories were organized, you might say, in a human-centered way. People were working together. You could work anywhere you want. You could also work anytime you wanted. But now these expensive and large machines require people to work around them. You preferably work 24/7 because they're expensive. You have to pay them back. So work changed, but it was almost impossible back then to predict in what ways the world would change more, because steam engines got smaller, got turned into railroads, and trains and railroads completely changed the way that we do diplomacy, warfare, that the economy is structured. The fact that we had these machines also meant that people started demanding free time. There were labor unions formed, new legislation around work. And I think the lesson to be drawn here, and again, this is borrowing from Harari, is that ultimately we are very happy, us, are very happy with the steam engine and what it brings to us. But it took about 100 years, a bit more, before we got to a place where it actually served us well. And so what Harari says, I'm not worried about AI in 200 years. I'm sure that by then we'll have figured out how to control this technology and what laws we make and we need and what social systems we need. I'm worried about the time in between. And so this is, I think, the task that is set upon us now. We can't predict what AI will bring. We can't predict the problems and also the benefits exactly, but we have to stay close to the point to make sure that the time in between now and when we have controlled this technology will create the least amount of suffering that we can imagine. Now, I think for AI, we can learn lessons, and now comes the Zen part. We can learn lessons from Eastern philosophy. And I won't make this too big, this part, but I want to take you a little bit into Robert Pirsig, and you might know him from Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. He also has this book on quality, which is also I can recommend. And I want to, this is new for me, the first time I'm doing this talk. I want to take you a little bit into the idea of what we can learn from Eastern philosophy and how we can apply it to designing AI systems. And then it's open for discussion, at least for me. But it's a bit scary for me to tell you, but let's see how it goes. Okay, so this is from Pirsig. So Zen Buddhists talk about just sitting, a meditative practice in which the idea of a duality, self and object, does not dominate one's consciousness. And then he refers back to his other book, so Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. He's talking about just fixing, in which the idea of this duality of self and object, in this case the self and the motorcycle, doesn't dominate consciousness. And when you're not dominated by those feelings of separateness from the self and the other, then you can be said to care about what you're doing. And caring is a feeling of identification with what one is doing. When one has this feeling, then he also sees the inverse side of caring, quality itself. So Pirsig, like quality is like the key word for Pirsig, in all of his work. And particularly in the second book, he goes quite deeply into this. So it's I have 3 quotes prepared. This is the second quote. This is about him talking in Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance about quality. So he sort of explains how he wants to write a book about quality, and he has to sort of backtrack. He recognizes he has to backtrack all the time. So to understand the meaning of quality requires a backup into metaphysics and then its relation to everyday life. That requires a backup into the area that relates metaphysics and everyday life, formal reason. And then he has to go all the way back up. And then, so metaphysics and science, he has to go all the way back up. But now we have with us some concepts that greatly alter the whole understanding of things, because he sort of delved up his understanding of the word quality. Quality is the Buddha, Eastern philosophy. Quality is scientific reality. Quality is the goal of art. It remains to work these concepts into a practical, down-to-earth context, and for this, there is nothing more practical or down-to-earth than what I have been talking about all along: the repair of an old motorcycle or the repair of an old AI, as far as I'm concerned. And then, final quote, Zen poem: while living, be a dead man, be completely dead, and then do as you please. All will be well. And then he translates this to his own metaphysics of quality. I know he can be a bit of an alchemist or mystic now and then, but so the way he describes it: while sustaining biological and social patterns, kill all intellectual patterns, kill them completely, and then follow dynamic quality, and morality will be served. So it's like I said, it's very cryptic, but if we want to take responsible AI seriously, and to be fair, this is my daily work, I don't think we're taking it very seriously. I don't think the AI Act is taking it really seriously. I don't think many scientific works, we take the word responsible seriously. I think here he's really trying to take it seriously. And I think what it comes down to is that in Zen Buddhist understanding, there's actually two truths. And it's maybe a bit like Plato in the cave, but there's this sort of absolute but undefinable truth that we can access through our feeling, through our senses, but we can't really describe. We can't describe it all, maybe. I think that person uses the word quality for this. And then there's another understanding of truth, which is non-deceptiveness. So that's a very pragmatic understanding of truth. Whatever works in relation to a self-object. And of course, in this undefinable truth, there is no self-object distinction. So it falls flat. And I think with AI, what we've been doing is conflating those two, or pretending that they're the same. Or maybe even worse, pretending that non-deceptiveness is the absolute truth. But every time we do this, we deceive ourselves, and we seem happy with this deception. Now, because it's undefinable, it doesn't work very well if I keep talking about it. So that's why now is the time for this guided meditation, because I sort of devised a brief experiment that we can all do, which will hopefully allow us to feel the difference between computing and being human. Let's put it that way. I call it the algorithm. And if you are willing to cooperate, and this is also and to go with us, and this is also for the people online, you can also pretty fine do this online, then I will ask you to just sit straight and close your eyes for a moment, and just focus on your breath for a few seconds. And what is going to happen is that I'm going to give you a riddle, and I'm going to ask you to try to solve this riddle, and at the same time, observe your thinking. This is very hard. So that's why it's good to create some space, some mental space. Take distance from outside distractions. And then I'll read an instruction of the riddle, and I'll give you some time to process. And again, try to observe your thoughts, because I'll ask questions about that afterwards. So the riddle is as follows. You're standing in a large space, and in front of you is a room. The room is completely sealed off, except for a door. The door is closed. You're standing in front of the door. Outside, next to the door, are 3 switches. They are all labeled as off. Inside the room, which you can't see inside, because the door is closed, inside of the room there are 3 light bulbs. They're all off. The riddle is this. You're allowed to flick the switches as many times you like, but you can't see inside. As soon as you go inside, you can't go outside anymore. When you're inside, I want you to tell me which light bulb is connected to which switch. And so while doing so, maybe you already solved the riddle, maybe you haven't. While doing so, observe your thinking. Observe the third space of your thinking. And then we are ending the experiment. So I'm asking you friendly, just you can open your eyes, sit in whichever way you like, in whichever tempo you like. And then I'm going to ask the question, someone in the audience or online, Did you find the answer to the riddle?
Try to find a cheating answer. Maybe I can break a light bulb by flipping one of the switches along.
Oh, nice.
And I'm switching one on and leaving the other off. And if that works, if I can break the light bulb somehow, then it might work. Yeah, that's not a proper solution, I suppose.
That's good. I love that. Yeah, I haven't heard that one before, but I love the answer. Yeah. To be clear, there's not a single good answer or bad answer, but this is I think a great answer. Is there anybody who had a different answer? Because there's multiple possibilities. Someone online? I think, in fact, there are endless possibilities. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Maybe we can't find out.
Okay. Yeah.
I think maybe we can't find out like what's the real answer because we can go only once and we have 3 choices to figure out. And if it's possible, like it's 2 choices or 1 choices, we could have find out, but it's like odd number. So I think we've got 3 switches, right?
Yeah.
So I couldn't figure out.
Yeah, no, very good. Yeah. So if you imagine that your thinking process, I think this is the first line of thinking that people have. Huh? So you try the permutations of switches, and you think, is there a permutation I can set the switches in which gives me the answer? And then you figure out in this search space that you constructed, there is no answer. So a computer would either tell you there's no answer, or it would break down, or there's an error or something. Now, what we can do is transform our search space, and we, as you did, I would say. Huh? So you said, well, I'm going to change the way I search, and I'm going to allow for the idea that if I flick the switch, a light will break. There's another possible answer, which is I can turn on one lamp for a bit longer. I turn it off again. Then I flick another switch. I go inside, and there will be one light bulb which is hot, but off. One is on, and one is off and cold. It's, I think, similar quality of answer from in my perspective. Now there are infinitely many answers to this, because it's about our imagination. I could also say, no, I'm breaking down the wall, or I'm calling a friend, or I'm ordering a helicopter. But what's interesting about all these is that we have a feeling about the quality of these answers. At least I do. I like some answers better than I do others. And I think this is problematic with computers because they don't have feelings. And they have this sort of search space paradox, you might say. So if you imagine the search space that you described, so with the permutations of the switches as this, and then I go around and I look for an answer, I don't find an answer. Now I have to change my search space and look for the answer out there, like flicking the switch or the hot light bulb or any other. How does a computer create a different search space? Well, there's a paradox, because either it's able to go outside of its search space and then, well, by definition, this is its search space, or it's not able to go outside, but then it can't find an answer. And I think ultimately, what creates these search spaces in us is something that is closely tied to sentience or goal-directedness. To me, feelings and goals are 2 sides of the same coin. But this is a problem that I don't think you can solve with mechanisms like the computer.
Have you tried asking
You mean this riddle? Yeah. No, that's a good one. Maybe we should try after. Yeah.
But is there any specific answer for this? Is there any specific answer or like an optimal answer we can give it to? Because like we're also we're supposing like the bulb, which is like filament, and it's get hot after some time. But what if it's an LED light? There's like so many hypotheses that can be involved in this.
Yeah, it's like potentially infinite number of answers. Let's say in the official riddle, the answer is you check for heat. And then heat is a dimension that is sort of, requires your creativity. So it's thinking outside the box, like literally outside of the box. But I would say that other answers are just as valid. And some answers are also valid, but don't feel as elegant or as aesthetically pleasing. It is related to a Zen practice called the koan, in which you ask, like typically a mentor would ask a student a riddle, and then the student goes through iterations. He meditates with the question. He goes through iterations around possible answers, and there are sort of answers that are typically considered as good by the Zen practice, and answers that are require you to keep thinking. You could even put a grade on them, so to speak. And what's interesting is that we humans, we have almost similar search trees. So if you as a student go through one of those paths, then your teacher probably would have also gone through that path and recognize where you are and can maybe help you or nudge you along one of those paths. So this is a riddle that is, I think, related in some ways to those to the koan tradition. But again, there's no objective criteria to which I can say that my answer is better than yours, or what would we base it on? So if a computer comes up with something, how would the computer know whether it's good or not? Because it has to ask us. So this brings me to the maybe final part. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Another problem that I see with the riddle, and this one that you can feel the lamp and that you can feel the hot is actually known in the logics. And we have this example. But the riddle is also conditioned by a lot of conditions. So, for example, you gave this idea of, well, I will break the wall and then I will see. But maybe the teacher or the one that is giving the riddle can say, well, no, that's not allowed. Or you have another example. For example, I can ask my friends and say, well, you go there, I go there, and so on. So, I have the feeling that the riddle is constructed by all the conditions that you have to take into account, and that is not allowing for creativity.
Okay, so it's about...
So you are restricting the people who have to solve the riddle with a lot of conditions.
Yeah.
And we are very polite, and we didn't say, well, we will ask all my friends, and we say, you handle the switch and you will look inside, and then meanwhile, so there's a lot of creativity to solve this artificial problem.
Yeah.
And it's also an issue that the riddle is very artificial and very different from real life riddles we have.
Yeah. So thanks for the question. So the relation with creativity, I think it is an interesting one. If we follow Margaret Boden's 3 definitions of computational creativity, you have combinatory, you have exploratory creativity, and you have transformational creativity. In fact, the underlying theory behind this, because this was part of my PhD work, the underlying theory stems from her, and it's essentially saying that transformational creativity requires an entity to change its own search space. And I think so, and this becomes a philosophical discussion, which is fine. But what does it mean to change your own search space? So, well, there's the word own, which assumes a self, which you could say, does a computer have a self or not? Do we have a self? Yeah, does a computer has a self? And what does it mean for a computer to change its own search space? We can change the search space. We know how to do that. We can construct it. But my assumption is that in order to change the search space, you have to also be able to construct a search space. And how do you construct a search space out of nothing? I don't think that computers are able to do that. I think computers are embodied search spaces, so to speak. So are embodied search spaces. We give it goals, either through explicit objective functions or through data, or through interaction with us, but it's always, in a way, parasitic on our sentience or on our goal-directedness, on the goals that we give it. I'm having a hard time, and this was also the case 11 years ago when I did my PhD, I'm having a hard time building a scientifically sound argument for this. So I think the criticism is also very valid on this, but still I want to share this because I feel like there's something important hidden here. at least the lesson that I draw from it in practice is that I let it influence the way that me and also my research group design responsible AI. So if we allow for the fact that AI is right now machine learning, so we're in the age of machine learning, and if we also allow for responsible to be to follow the understanding that we just maybe had or that we went into, so true responsibility, then we can think about how to design AI systems in a responsible way. So this is typically how we start discussion about AI and ethics, the trolley problem. I see people nodding, so you probably know. So the question is, you can do a switch and change the course of the tram. And the question is, what is at the question mark? So what is the person, or you, if you're this person, what are you thinking? Now, typically, in a philosophical first-year philosophy class, the answer is, well, if I was Kant, I would be thinking that, and if I was Aristotle, I would be thinking that, but realistically, what would you be thinking if you were there? You're probably thinking, who built this tram? Which I take as an AI engineer by training. I take this as a very serious question. Who built this tram? Who put me here? What is this madness? Get me out of here. I mean, those are the real questions. And so we should approach it, I think, in a very real way, and also approach AI technology. I mean, fortunately, it's not always this bad, but AI can have pretty bad consequences. So we should take those questions very seriously. And my guideline here is to have the locus of human control. And with control, I don't just mean like a human in the loop, but meaningful human control, and also some level of understanding. As I claimed earlier, there can never be a full understanding because the system is too complex for us to comprehend, but at least some level of understanding. And to put this locus as close as possible to the here now of responsible action or responsible decision. So in this understanding, there cannot be responsible AI without responsible human. And the design challenge is to try to keep the human interaction, human control, close to the here now of this responsible decision that the AI human system together has to make. I'll give you one example of where this goes wrong, and then I'll give you a couple of examples of our research. Let's go through very quickly. I don't want to go too deeply into the research. A number of years ago, there was an AI tool that was used in American courts that would support or help the judge in reaching a verdict. And the AI tool would learn from all previous verdicts. It would learn from a particular case that's written up. And then it would, I would imagine, sit like right next to the judge's desk. And it would say guilty, not guilty. And of course, it's all up to the judge in the end, so he can decide. But just like we imagine ourselves in the position of this person, imagine yourself in the position of a judge sitting next to an AI, black box AI, that has all the data and compute power in the world, so to speak, and that says guilty. So you have to be pretty convinced and a strong judge in order to say, I think I know better than the AI. Now, of course, we designed our legal system in such a way that ultimately there's a human at the end of the chain that makes a decision. So we can't replace a judge with a law book alone, because I think ultimately it comes down to a human judgment based on quality, and a human is able to make exceptions to the rules. We can codify the rules, but it's difficult to codify the exceptions because ultimately there are also rules. So we've established through the time that we need a human at the end of this decision chain. Now, if you put an AI next to it, things can go wrong. And in fact, they have gone wrong. So people have been judged in this situation with an AI giving advice to the judge. There have also been appeals of people saying, look, I have a right to a human judge. And so I want to see at least what's in the black box. Like, what is the reasoning for this AI that helped the judge came to this conclusion? And the company fought this claim and said, no, IP is more important than the right of transparency of law. And so, interesting case. Ultimately, the company lost. So they had to, they actually stopped using those devices, fortunately. But I think that's a clear example of where there was no through meaningful control by a human, and AI took over control in the wrong way. And there's many examples, of course, in AI where we see the locus of control being put in the wrong position. So the research program that I spearhead at Utrecht is called the CAUSE program. Cause, of course, having two meanings. So it's for a good cause. We're a public institution, so I believe we should try to do good for society and humans. But also, I think causality is at the core of many of these problems. And cause stands for creativity, autonomy, understanding, sentience, and ethics. As these fields, or these problems, or these elements, aspects of human experience are typically where there's a friction between the computational way of reasoning and our human understanding or human sentience, or etc. So when humans and AI meet, this is where it gets interesting. And so we do a number of projects that fall within this agenda. We're a very practical university, so we work together with partners. So with a number of media partners, we've designed a methodology for working with foundation models, with financial institutions. We help them open up the black box to make sure that people who get, for example, a mortgage evaluation, that they know what the decision is based on, and also that the decision is understandable by the person that has to tell it. So we put the locus hopefully in the right place. We work with public servants in making sure that the letters that they write and they could send out match with the reading level of the people who receive them. So a lot in media, financials, also in healthcare. Let's not go too deeply into that, but I just want to point out that a lot of this philosophy is also being put into practice. And then I want to end with this quote that I particularly like. The real problem with humanity is the following: we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and Gothic technology. All right, that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Well, the questions. So the floor is open to questions, also from the Zoom. Do we have any questions here in the audience? Yeah, Francis.
Well, if I understand your formulation well, there are fundamental problems or potential solutions that we need to take into account. There is the issue of quality and the issue of thinking out of the box. Now, if I want to formulate in the kind of terminology that I use, and I would say quality is the question of having a complex value system. And my point is always intuitive. The values are much more complex than people think, which is one of the reasons why often we can make a good judgment without being able to give good logical reasons for why we make that judgment. But on the other hand, it's of course not infallible, and we make complex judgments, often wrong, but often right at moments when you wouldn't expect it. So I think that AI should indeed move more towards that case, but I think that the kind of models like ChatGPT have moved quite well in that direction. What they still lack is an embodied aspect. It means part of our intuition is the fact that we can physically interact with things, and that gives us, I think, an extra dimension which the AI doesn't have. On the other hand, all the intuition that has to do with language, I think AI can simulate that pretty well. Then the second problem, the problem of out-of-the-box thinking, that's something that actually I was looking at during my PhD, which was about representations and changing representations. So I looked at the problem both from problem solving and the AI and from the point of view of physics. And the important concept I introduced in the PhD was what I call the distinction dynamics. That is, normally when we make a representation, when we define a search page, we start from a number of distinctions, which you might call dimensions or parameters. We start by assuming, like, for example, in the bulk problems, there are 3 lamps and there are 3 switches and there is a door, and we make a couple of distinctions like that. But typically we will not make the distinction between a hot lamp and a goal planner. But you seem to imply that AI can't do that. That would be the case in the good old-fashioned AI, the symbolic AI, because the symbols are what defines what the AI can do. So the AI can look at all possible combinations of its symbols, which correspond to combinations of concepts, which correspond to what I call combination of distinctions. So it is within a fixed search space. But with the machine learning AI, in a sense, there is an extra dimension, which is a dimension of time. That means that each time you give additional data, more can be extracted. So it's like an example is harmonic analysis, a Fourier transform. A Fourier transform, a signal in time, that signal in time actually has infinite dimensions. So if there is an infinite amount of data that can follow in time, you can in principle extract an infinite number of dimensions. Of course, that doesn't guarantee that you will extract the right dimension. That still remains a form of creativity. You need to extract the right dimensions. But I think if your machine learning system is unlimited in the number of things it can learn, in principle, it can discover new distinctions, new concepts, new parameters, new dimensions of its search space.
Yeah. It's great. So I think you say complexity. I think complexity is a necessary but not sufficient criterion for value.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you that the what we now call, let's say, AI in the age of machine learning systems have different properties than the good old-fashioned AI had. But I don't think we're there yet. I think we're being deceived of being there yet.
No,
because
I don't think we are there yet, but I think that the paradigm allows more than people may be willing to admit.
But so I think I can pinpoint the exact point where maybe we disagree, or at least where I see the problem. I think I follow you when you say that in order to have creativity, you need the capacity for infinite dimensions. But I think because we are still talking about what's ultimately a digital system, or dualistic system of zeros and ones, we don't have the infinite dimensions yet. So in other words, if I would build a neural network on a different architecture than a computer, so maybe let's say what we now call neuromorphic systems, I see openings for these infinite dimensions and also for true creativity. I'm not sure if we're talking about sentience yet, that's maybe another step, but there's that. But as long as we have to encode or simulate everything from a digital device or a computer device, I think we're still deceiving ourselves. It can help us understand how these systems work, but they're not the thing itself.
The problem I have is that at a certain moment, infinity, if you have a trillion parameters, if you have a trillion dimensions, I think it's as close to infinity as we will ever get. Our brain is also finite. There is a finite number of atoms in our brain. So saying that it's digital, therefore it's not the same as continuous, mathematically it's true, but practically I'm not sure that that is the real difference.
But then we're still, when it comes to sentience, we're still in different territories, I think. Or would you say that?
The sentience, what I agree with you, that you need embodiment. That means you need to be able to continuously interact with the world via a wide range of senses and so on. So that AI lacks.
Yeah.
But in principle, you could build robots, but of course these robots will, compared to us, be still very clumsy, but maybe at some stage they may reach that kind of something by being embodied and having the real sensation of the world.
Yeah. So exactly. So I think what my sort of call to action is that it's twofold. So as long as we are not there yet, we need to take the deception very seriously. And I think we need to take quality very seriously, and then design our systems around that. So to put humans in the right position. And in parallel, we can think about other artifacts that might have those qualities, or might have feelings, or might have creativity. I don't think they're computers, but it doesn't mean that we can't create those artifacts. In fact, I believe that with AI, we will be able to produce those artifacts, because AI will be a tool for the next system technology. So it's sort of twofold. In a short-term practical sense, let's make sure we put humans in the right position and we appreciate the qualities that they have. And in a long-term, a bit more philosophical sense, let's also work on different groundings for these systems, different embodiments for these systems.
About the putting the humans in, do you know the work of Narayan and Kapoor, AI Snake Oil?
No.
It's a very nice book that makes many of the same points. It's a kind of a debunking of the AI hype, looking at what AI can and cannot do, and saying that yes, you always need to have a human as close as possible to the real thing, like you say, not so much. Their point is, it does not make sense to try to predefine a foolproof AI that will never make any mistakes. That's not possible. So whatever the AI does, at some moment it may make a mistake, and then you should still be able to intervene at the last stage. So that is their point. Not try to put the humans in the beginning of the loop so that they design a perfect AI, but make sure that they are still at the end of the loop so that they can still intervene if the AI goes the wrong way.
Yeah. And that's, of course, that sits on in a tension with our intention of machines, because we have machines because we want to get rid of all the rote and boring work. And so it's sort of, machines in a way are born out of laziness. And then this is suggesting that no, we can't be that lazy. We still have to do some heavy lifting and some work. And but I think it's the right message. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Actually, I'm sorry, but I've got like 2-3 questions for you. The first question is from all of you. According to me, the deception part is like the inner working of the model, because it's still black box and we couldn't figure out like how we're working. And this is like the AI is getting much more better and getting sentient. But like, how are we working to process that black box processing that's been undergoing like the model? My second question is this. You're related to the EU relations in AI field. So in the going of like this US-China war, where US is making these Stargate project for AI clusters and all that, how's the EU is like progressing and wants what to do as a work? And my third question is related to me. So I'm in master's program in AI. So I also use the generative AI. So what kind of change can I see in the future, and how am I going to get like better in programming while using as a tool like generative AI? Because I work it before that, I used to like go over Stack Overflow and do coding by myself and all that, but like lead code and all that. But now how it's going to change?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Three lecturers, if you want to give the answer that they deserve. But let me try. So your first question is about explainability and the tools that are available to sort of opening up this black box, if I understand. So I think, and this claim is sometimes not accepted or liked. I think it's not a black box. It's completely transparent. We're just not smart enough to understand what's going on. And in order to comfort ourselves, we call it a black box, as if there's something that's keeping us out. But if I have a neural network, I can check every weight. I can check every neuron at every time. It's just that I can't keep it all in my mind at the same time to understand what's going on. And even computationally, if you want to trace back what caused a certain output to a certain decision or input, we have a hard time because it becomes computationally intractable at some point. There are tools that you sort of use as an overlay, but those are not tools that say sort of remove the blackness of the box. They're sort of dumbing down the system and to make it dumb enough for us to understand with our limited brains. So Shep and Leijnen, you might, as a student, you might have heard of it. Like, you have many of those tools. But my point is, you will never get a perfect translation because you lose information if you dumb down to our level. So it's a bit of a disappointment sometimes.
Yeah. I wanted to say, like, for a model, we can change hyperparameters. We can change what's the input and what's the output. But there's like a black box. And I want to like understand if we can understand it and we can change it to ourselves, like for our betterment. So can we do that, or like is it like much more work we need to do?
No, so I would say it's a theoretical problem that we can't solve. Maybe The only way out is if you follow Elon Musk and you think that if we are able to increase our bandwidth and connect our brain, then maybe we're able to understand, right? Something along those sci-fi lines. But I think practically, I don't see an answer to this. Then to your second question, which is also very big, so EU policy. I started working in the Brussels networks. The EU is organized as a stacked bunch of networks. I started working there about 4 or 5 years ago. And with the DG Connect, which is like the Ministry of Digitization, you might say, of the EU, there was not as much urgency as you would hope. And there was also not as much knowledge about what needs to be done. If I can honestly say that in the past 4 years, I've seen enormous change there. The downside is it's still the same people and still the same culture. So I don't think that's changed, and I don't think that will change very soon. So the nature of the bureaucracy in Brussels, I don't see changing. But there are very hardworking and smart people there, and I think they're doing the right things, the things that make sense. I don't know if you know the Draghi report that came out in September. It's about how Europe can bootstrap itself out of our economic death trap that we're in, and AI plays a major part. And to give you 2 policy examples that I think are very hopeful. The first is that the EU right now works with proposal-based funding most of the time. So that means that that's great if you actually live up to your proposal, but there's hardly any checks after whether you produce quality. Whereas in the US and now also in the UK and Germany, there are more challenge-based funding. So challenge-based funding is based on the outcome and is usually stage-gated. The downside of this is much more top-down. So you get research which is pulled towards a certain goal rather than sort of bottom-up exploratory. And so there's also a lot of resistance to this from the academic side. But for the European economy and for the defense system, it makes a lot of sense to do more challenge-based research because you get the best outcomes and not so much the best ideas. So this is a real struggle. So that's one. Second part, by the way, in my work with the AI coalition, I've been advocating very strongly for both. So both the challenge part, but also the compute part. Europe does not have a good position in infrastructure. In the Netherlands, we have ASML. They occupy part of the stack, but other than that, there's not much going on in Europe. What we've been advocating for is a public infrastructure for AI. There's now an initiative called the AI factories. There's, I think, about 12 now being made in Europe, and I'm involved with a proposal for one in the Netherlands. And that's a facility of, let's say, around 300 million euros of GPU chips, so to speak. So that's good for experimentation. It's good for scientists. If you want to compete with Google and Microsoft, that's nothing, because this 300 million euros, Google is spending 100 billion per year on cloud. So yeah, it's peanuts.
500 billion.
Yeah, its target is 500 million. But I also wouldn't say it's completely hopeless, because there's also the Gigafactories proposal. And the Gigafactory is 3 to 8 billion and 100K NVIDIA chips. So that's pretty serious. And there are quite large initiatives in the orders of hundreds of billions coming from France and EU, and with the defense spending that might even be increased. So I don't think we'll get as much investment as we get in the US and China, but that's also because they're sort of playing a game with each other. But I think Europe can be, if you play smart, can be the smart one, the third one that sort of profits from both sides if you play our cards right. And I really like the approach of having a public investments in the infrastructure in the same way that we have public investments in our roads, because it keeps them neutral, and it also makes sure that they can't be misused or used in other ways than we envision in our legislation. So I think as a civilian and a citizen of Europe, I'm very happy with these investments. That's of course, nobody knows how it's going to play out, I should say. So it's an exciting time right now, but at least the AI is taken very seriously by all the way to the top. Von der Leijnen 3 days ago said that they were making, literally, we were making policy that expects AI to reach human level reasoning in 2050. And now we are taking into consideration that it will take only 2 or 3 years to get there. This is her speech that von der Leijnen said. So if she uses those words in the speech, it shows that they consider it very very important. Yeah. And your third question? Sorry, I forgot.
My question?
as the use of chatbot or like ChatGPT, generative AI is gone very good, and now everyone's is using it. So as a student, like I used to be in my bachelor's, and there was no ChatGPT at that time. So I used to go and learn all the things, all the programming languages, and go to Stack Overflow and do all the programmings in Git code. But now the ChatGPT and generative AI is going on, and we could use them as a tool to help us code. So, what's the future of learning? How it's gonna be? And like, am I just doing a prompt engineering or that, or just like it's a computer science engineering? And how we're gonna learn that? How we're gonna execute that with this in place? And how do we see ourselves like working with AI, but not like totally dependent on that?
Yeah, well, again, so difficult to predict the future here. Of course, it's an enormous challenge also for the educators, for the teachers, because if you're a first-year student, teachers also don't know what the students will need after 4 or 5 years of training in the field, because it changes so fast. What I do see happening now in the field is that if you look at the infrastructure and the model and the application stacks or layers, there's a lot of attention to the models, because there's only a few number of models. There's a lot of this is a picture I showed there. So there's competition between those models. You can evaluate them, but the interesting stuff is really happening on the infrastructure and the application layer. So the infrastructure ultimately will determine the costs for a large part. So for instance, Sam Altman, I don't like him, but sometimes he says the right thing. The cost of inference might go down to the cost of energy. So that means that if you own the infrastructure, you essentially there will be full commodification. So the infrastructure will be an important control point. But also at the same time, we see the value is being created in the application layer. So companies like Mistral from France, who are sort of trying to be a competitor to American big tech, they are now hiring a lot of business translators, people that understand AI, that can program, but that can program it in a particular business context. So if you know AI, you know how it works, and you also know how to program, there's a lot of work to be done there. Because, of course, your work is sped up because you use Copilot or something else, but still you need people in order to tweak the system for a particular context. And it seems to be, at least for me now, that that's something where for the foreseeable future, they'll need a lot of people to do that kind of work. But that's, of course, different from the programming that we used to have 5 or 10 years ago. So it's, yeah. It's exciting, but also, as the Chinese say, may you live in interesting times. So it's, yeah. All right.
Okay, we had a question online. Okay, Clément can't answer. Okay, Stefan, analog versus digital computers. A question about that. Would AI based on analog computers change the game? Do you understand the question?
Yeah, I'm thinking about
Very good. Okay.
Yeah. So I think so. The question is, does AI based on analog computers change the game? I think that taps into the question of or the comment also discussion that we had earlier. Well, I mean, the honest answer is it might. I think it's a good candidate for that. Right now, you have the field of neuromorphic computing, which is interesting because in a way, neural networks are very neuromorphic, but what they probably mean is other than neural networks inspired by the brain. This goes all the way from spiking neural networks down to designing different kind of chip architectures. So I think that's a very promising field in 2 ways. First of all, it might make our current day AI much more efficient. So we can run algorithms at times 1,000 or 10,000 or more the efficiency. This will not only reduce the cost and the carbon footprint of AI, but it will also open up opportunities for Europe to compete in this game, because suddenly you don't need a 500 billion Stargate project, but you can actually compete as a smaller company. So I think this driving down the cost is very important for Europe, and neuromorphic might play a role, including analog computers. And the second reason, I think, and this was also what we just discussed, is that if we have analog computers, they might open up possibilities for types of intelligence that we don't get from digital computers. At least that's my assumption. I wouldn't call it even a theory, but it's an assumption that we can get different types of AIs if we have different types of computational architectures. And then analog is, of course, a very wide definition. We can have many types of analog computers. So, but I would definitely recommend this as a research line of working, and not just for universities, but for Europe to dive deeply into this, because it strategically helps us in the long run if we want to compete with the US and China.
Okay. I hope this answered Clément's question. Right. And then Ola, you had a question as well. And Clément, if you have follow-up questions, please type it in.
Okay.
Can we put you on screen? Wait, maybe I can stop the share, then we can see you.
Not necessary. Hello.
Not necessary. Okay, well, you're not on the big
No.
screen.
Okay. Hello, guys. Stefan, thank you very much for the talk. Super informative, insightful, and will give me so many things to digest. I would like to ask your opinion about one algorithm which appeared in 2023, which is called skill mix algorithm. And I think it's put inside of ChatGPT 4 version, and which is responsible for its success, or at least the difference it made comparing with ChatGPT 3. And I'd like to ask this question referring to your COAS model. By the way, very elegant to take it from Aristotle, 4 causes. Super, super cool. And this skill mix algorithm takes not the combination of possible outcomes, but it takes the combination of cognitive and linguistic skills of humans. And that is why it gives in as output more creative output. So it's really great, because then we feel that GPT uses metaphors, humors, I don't know, like mathematical thinking, summarizing, which is great. But my question is, isn't it violence of kind of human creativity? And do you think this could be a first place where we need to signal that we need to put human first and to value humans' creativity at this point more than machine creativity? So let me know if I'm not clear.
No, thank you, Olga. I think the innovation of OpenAI that you're referring to is a so-called mix of experts model. Because I didn't quite catch the name of the
skill mix, just skill mix. Yeah, it was published by you, YU, in 2023 or something. Yeah.
Okay. So if I'm correct, this is one of the mix of experts models by OpenAI, because the timing seems about right for that. I think you need to. I think it's important that we see the public communication of OpenAI and other large model providers always in the light of their main challenge. And their main challenge is attracting investments. So whether it's warning for the long-term risks of AI, or whether it's talking about the size of models and the size of the value and data, etc., their messaging is typically catered towards investors, because that's who they need to convince, and then the users are like a nice side effect for them. I think for the mix of experts models, this is the same. So what is the main concern of investors is that the exponential growth curve of adding more data and money, and then you get exponential value increase, that this curve is slowing down. I should do this way for the like this for the camera. So of course, every exponential curve in nature becomes an S-curve at some point, also the value curve for large models. But it's in the interest of OpenAI and others to extend this as far as possible. Now, it seems like around that time, so about 2 years ago, we saw some slowing down, meaning that if you put in more data, more compute, etc., you don't get an exponential increase in value. And that might signal a turning, like an inflection point. And one of the tricks that OpenAI and others, and Mistral as well, have done is they created so-called mix of expert models. So instead of having a larger model, you put 8 models in a raincoat and have them pretend they're one model, so you can continue the story of, well, we need more parameters and data, etc., in order to get more value. But ultimately, you're changing the whole logic of the game. You start to tinker again instead of relying on skill and the auto detection of features. So that's like more of a warning signal for the type of messaging that they give than I think the core of the question that you have, because your question was more about putting human creativity first when compared to using these machines. So could you maybe specify that part of the question a bit further?
Yeah. It's the question was is because creativity in AI is important tool, but here in this example of skill mix models, we saw that can be really creative because it's actually takes even three types of or three definitions of the creativity which you referred of Boden. Combinatory combination, so something like this, of course, per default, then explanatory, of course, as well, because using these skills, it gives you depth in the subject you're explaining. And of course, it also breaks the rule of previous AI models. So it's actually the skill mix it's a really big one. And I was thinking that it isn't like should be here a threshold when we use when we rely on human creativity, and then when we say, okay, this is machine creativity is good, but it shouldn't be better than human. So this kind of concern I have.
So my concern is not so much that AI will reach the level of transformational creativity, even if you sort of mix different exploratory creative systems, because you might in some level say that they are able to transform each other's search spaces, but in the end, it's all descriptive. So it's still a big search space in the end. At least that will be my position in this. So in that sense, I'm not worried about a model becoming truly transformationally creative, because I don't think it's possible with the current computational architecture that we have. And again, it's in the interest of OpenAI to pretend that it's creative and it's challenging, etc. And that, of course, is not to say that there are problems when it comes to protecting human creativity, and particularly protecting IP of human creativity in the light of these recent advancements of models. I think, for one, the IP legislation needs a complete overhaul. I think that was the case with the internet, and now with AI, it certainly needs to be completely overhauled. But also with these companies, they are not compliant by design. So they take what they want, and they wait for lawsuits, which is also why they've all attached themselves to one of the big tech players, because OpenAI can't fight all those lawsuits alone, so it needs Microsoft to fight them. So I think the concern is not so much a technical one, or one of AI becoming as good as humans or better than humans. The concern is more of a practical one in terms of how it shapes the field of the creative sector, and where it leaves the human creators in this mix. So if the human creator is nothing more than a input data generating tool for AI, then I think we have a major problem. Yeah. Okay. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very informative. Thanks.
Okay, great. There are no more questions here. Any more questions here from the audience? Francis,
I'm just curious, what is your take on the existential risk of AI?
Which existential risk?
The risk that it will erase humanity, take over, or just decide that we're not important enough, that it has some other goals. And
yeah, so I think there are three classes of existential risks. So there's the sort of the unintended side effects. There's the malintended effects of a person or a group of people that weaponize AI. And then there's the third category of AI running amok intentionally, so intentional AI. Right now, we see the first class of threats all around us, meaning AI has all kinds of unintended side effects which harm people. I don't think we're at the level of existential threat yet, but at the same time, influencing elections, even if that could also be malintent, by the way, but even if it's unintended, could pose an existential threat in the long run. So, for example, if AI if LLMs are shaping the outcome of elections, then that could lead to more autocratic regimes, which could lead to an all-scale war or something. So that's existential in a way. It could also be a malintent behind it. So it could be Russian bots using LLMs that try to influence our elections. On a smaller scale, I saw today a very sad news story about a lawsuit against Character AI, the LLM provider, where a teenage boy was talking, so number one use case was talking to an LLM, and after a certain time committed suicide, the boy. And looking back at the logs of the LLM, it was clear that the LLM pushed the boy towards depression and towards suicide. The Character AI claimed the First Amendment of free speech, and this was rejected by the judge. So I think it was today or yesterday, this news story. So they are now, to some extent at least, accountable for the death of this boy. That's all nice legally and financially, but the sadness of the story is that AI right now is, in that sense, killing people unintendedly. And that's aside from the malintent. It's not existential, though. I think the existential part comes from the malintent or from the intentional AI part. So from the malintent part, it really depends on who is in charge of AI and who do we give access to the control points in the AI stack, so the infrastructure, model, and application layer, I would say. It's very hard to control this. So the way that the EU is currently thinking about this is treating it as a biohazard system. So you have the AI Act, which considers the unintended bad effects of AI as harms, as a product regulation. But then there's also the general purpose AI class of systems. And what the AI thinking is to put sort of hazard labels on them, and then to control the export and control the ownership of those types of AIs. It's not law yet, but I think it will be shaped like that. Then the third class of harmful AI, which is intentional AI, so Terminator, an AI that wants to destroy us. I am at the moment not worried about that because, like I said, I see intention and feeling as two sides of the same coin. My claim is that computers don't have feeling, therefore don't have intention. They don't have a self, actually. And so I don't think a computer wants anything. We could maybe see humans building a computer that pretends it wants something, so we don't blame the humans behind it, but that's still malintent. What I do see happening is AI being a tool for building a system that has intents, so to speak. So it would be a sort of a necessary next step. So with AI, you might be able to build other systems, but I don't think that's going to happen in the short term. But let's say if you look at 100 or 200 years from now, that would definitely be a concern to me. Yeah, I would say. But then, yeah, no, it's not the AI that we have today. It's a different hardware.
Well, I'm inclined to think that we don't need AI for people to have influence on elections or to have autocratic systems. We have seen that played out well enough before there was anything like AI. So, of course, AI can be used by these kind of things. I think that is indeed the greatest danger. As in terms of the side effects, like somebody committing suicide, yeah, that's not impossible, but I think these are rather the exceptions rather than the general rule. And I'm honestly more afraid of the negative effect of social media and smartphone addiction than of AI use at this moment.
Yeah, although the combination of social media and AI, I don't think we've seen the full extent of yet. I think
that's true. There may be some multiplication of negative effects.
Let's say the capacity of AI to personalize. We see it a bit in recommender your algorithm streams, but with generative AI, you're no longer bound to existing content. So you can produce content that is completely targeted at a single person at that moment. This is technically already possible, and I think it will only be a few years before you see it. And I think that will be much more powerful than many people realize right now. So that
is true. If you learn the psychology of a particular person and you have a general, very good understanding of human psychology, which AI already has.
Exactly.
Understanding not in the sense of sentient, but in the sense of knowing the kind of things that make people react in certain ways. Yeah, that could indeed be
very hard. Like this, Harari had, so AI knows our feelings better than we do. I think it will manifest in social media.
Yeah.
So.
We have another question from the online audience. What efficient ways or tools do you recommend to monitor or improve the paralytic emotions of decision makers?
Well, I mean, so yes. So the question is, what efficient ways or tools do you recommend to monitor or improve the Paleolithic emotions of decision makers? So that's an interesting question. So here I think we tend to talk about AI in a negative sense, or in a warning and the risks, and rightfully so, because those are the things we need to be concerned about. Of course, AI itself, at least for me, doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. In fact, I think it will ultimately bring us much more good than it will bring us bad. But we're more worried about the bad side. I think this is a case actually where AI can be used as a tool for good, because it can not only weaponize our feelings against us, as for example would happen in social media, it could also help us better understand who we are and also sort of become the anti-weapon to that. To be fair, I think there are other tools to our disposal which could be more helpful than AI. So, for example, I consider meditation a very useful tool against our Paleolithic, the weaponization of our Paleolithic emotions, because meditation to me is a practice of de-addiction. A lot of mechanisms in digitization, and I would also say in capitalism, revolve around creating addictions. And addictions not just in the substance abuse terms, but any kind of addictions. And meditation, the looking inwards and the looking towards your patterns, is a way of de-addicting. So I would say twofold. You can use AI to monitor your emotions, but I think you also have the tools already to monitor your emotions. And those tools benefit from less screen time rather than more screen time.
I fully agree. I think that what AI may be accelerating is the fact that we need to learn to understand our own emotions better. Once we do that, lots of problems may just dissipate. And as you say, meditation, mindfulness, living closer to nature are all methods that definitely help. And AI as a kind of a psychotherapist can also help. I think we will need a combination of these things.
Okay. May I have one? Chair, I need also this question. So your title is AI and the Art of Deception, and I was when I saw the title, I was wondering whether you will be talking about training data. And you did briefly. You were talking about cupcakes and poppies, and told us, we need to kind of label data sets to then build whatever kind of filter and go from there. But of course, this labeling is actually done by people, right? So somebody's actually saying at the outset, these are cupcakes and these are dogs. And whilst this might be a trivial example, right? So, but there might be more complicated cases. Nonetheless, the labeling is done by ghost workers, by lay people who find, quick jobs on Amazon's Mechanical Turk for a couple of cents per job. So we have non-experts doing all this labeling. Doesn't that raise the risk of deception, right? And not the kind of unintentional deception that we saw in the AI use in court cases. So there we know that it perpetuates racial stereotyping. We have all court cases that predominantly judge blacks harder than whites, and then because the AI is trained on that data, it picks up on this and kind of makes it more normal or standard. This is Katie O'Neill's weapons of mass destruction kind of stuff. But can it also be, or has it been, more cases where this has been actively employed to actively kind of push an LLM in a certain direction, political views or views on war or whatever it might be, where the deception is kind of inserted early on in the training data. Is there such a thing? Is that a problem?
Absolutely. I think there are many cases. I can give you one prominent example about the Great Deception. As soon as it was announced that the Netherlands would create their own public large language model, it's called GPT-NL. When I say large, it's in the order of 15 million euros, so it's not competitive, but it's like the first steps towards having a public model. One of the first organizations that sprung into action was the Evangelical Broadcasting Unit. Because they thought if we open up our data sets and we are early and we let the model learn from our data, it will skew or bias the model towards a more evangelical life view. This actually happened. Yeah. So they were very smart. And so it's definitely a battle on propaganda and worldviews already going on in these models. I think a more recent example was, I think, Grok, so Elon Musk's model being quite racist towards what happened in South Africa. And then someone asks, why are you saying this? He says, my owner told me to say this, something along those lines. So there's plenty of evidence of this happening. Of course, it happens a lot behind the scenes, so you don't know always about it. I think what's important is that we understand that ultimately machine learned models are projections of the data sets that they embody, right? So we've come out of a very interesting couple of years where the low-hanging fruit has been plucked, the internet and all the libraries, etc. A large language model uses about 10% or 15% of all the data in the world. So that means you can go 10 times as much data and then it's more or less done. So that means that we now enter a new phase where data is actively collected and also for companies produces a control point or a moat that you can defend. So many of the big tech companies have seen this coming. So they build cameras and microphones everywhere already in devices, because that gives you access to high quality data and it gives you an advantage. The next phase of this will be robots and manufacturing. So that's why they're pushing this right now, because you gather data and your competitor can't. And so they're constantly generating more high quality data. In some cases, like in robotics, I don't think there's necessarily an advantage of biasing that or skewing that. But when it comes to large language models in particular, of course, there's all kinds of forces pulling towards that, political forces, but also like the Evangelical Broadcasting Unit. So this is very much a thing happening right now. Yeah.
Well, I predicted that we would soon have make America great again, LLM that will be fed by all the texts of Trump and supporters, and a very different worldview of ChatGPT. At the moment, the LLMs are more liberal, noted, and sometimes they are a bit in the stage.
Yeah.
Another example of deception of AI that I've seen right now, it's like the Reddit threatens to sue researchers of like University of Zurich, which made AI chatbots on the Reddit, and they have the ability to change the human's perception and all that. So this is the example that I got. My question is, like, we're at the initial stage of AI. What if we get to the AGI, like artificial general intelligence? What are the counterattacks? What we can do to like not go in the negative direction? And there's after that like quantum computing, which like connects with AI in future. So how we're gonna control that and like how we're gonna make it for the good impact?
So I think AGI is one of the worst defined terms that I know. And in fact, almost everybody you ask for a definition will give you a different sentiment or different worry or different definition of it. I think there's a couple of types of answers. So one is larger language models that at some point might equal or be better at tasks that we do. Another answer is they are better able to generalize, so they can learn one task and transfer that to the next. Another is that they will be like people with rights, and yet another one is they will be an existential threat and have a teleology, a goal-directedness, and want to kill us. And I think they're all very different scenarios and all have very different likelihoods of occurring. I think the first one we can sort of extrapolate maybe. So, and we in fact see happening right now. So we do see language models in particular tasks being as good or sometimes better than humans. But we've had that a long time before because every machine has this property in a way. So it's not necessarily that scary. When it comes to sentience and existential threat and goal-directedness, I'm not that worried about that part at the moment because I think that's a deception. I think it's not a deception in the disappointment sense. It's a good thing, but it's a magic trick right now. So I'm not that worried. Although I do think that they will be used to build the next technology which might have that. So yeah. Okay.
Further question from the online crowd, because we have no more questions here. No? Well, then please join me in thanking our speaker. I'm going to close the Zoom meeting now.